Hey, everybody. So glad to have you with us tonight. My name is John Selders, and I am pleased and godly proud to have this opportunity and this platform and space to talk to some of the most interesting, smartest, integral, authentic folk I know. About a wide range of things that have to do with faith and public life and spirituality, and sometimes just a little bit of foolishness, just a little bit of foolishness. And so tonight, come on with a bit of heavy-heartedness, as I've invited a few of my brothers and partners and champions in the work of justice and faith, as to chop it up a little bit about our brother Bishop Carlton Pearson, who made transition on yesterday evening. And so if y'all just excuse me a bit, I'm not going to tell you that I'm not going to be emotional, because my friend has made transition. And so there may be moments of some emotionality in the context of our conversation, but I've invited some folk who I believe have something to say, and Bishop Pearson was significant in their lives. So let me just bring them on. Let me introduce Pastor Patrick Schaefer, who is the senior pastor of City of Faith Church. I hope I got that right. Lord have mercy. I ain't looking at no notes. In Chicago, Illinois. Say hello to everybody.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Of course. Let me bring on my brother from another mother, who is the senior prelate and Freedom Assembly Worldwide, International, all over the universe and globe. He's also a very important person and an administrator at Seattle University, and is a teacher and an author. And my brother, the Reverend Dr. Bishop Edward Donaldson III.
Good evening.
Let me also bring in to this space my brother, another brother from another mother, or from the same mama. I don't remember. Anyway, who I've known we've known for the better part of our lives together, and have certainly journeyed together down through the year, as people would say. He hails from spaces and places that I'm from. He is an activist, an artist, a singer and musician in his own right, and a theologian and scholar, and a pastor, the Reverend Osaji Fu Sekou, and soon to be doctor, Reverend Doctor, soon to be. And last but not least, I wanted to bring you on last because I think what we represent in relationship to Bishop Pearson is several generations, I would say, of who he reached and how he touched our lives. This young man hails now from the city of Philadelphia, comes through the Midwest, represent Indianapolis, Indiana, and the disciples. Folk don't know that about you, Nicholas, but now is senior pastor of Living Water Church, United Church of Christ in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and is the council person elect for the city. Just won election as council person for the city of Philadelphia. Pastor Reverend Nicholas O'Rourke.
Able to be with you, Bishop.
Yeah. And so here we are, brothers. Let's chop it up. Let me ask this question: what were your earliest memories of meeting and being introduced to Bishop Pearson? Go for it.
The first time I met him, like face to face, for me was 1994 at Oral Roberts University. I was a freshman, and it was only 15 Black people, students on campus, and so for us, he was a rock star. This was early Azusa kind of thing, and he was an evangelist. He was a travel evangelist, so he would come to Chicago for Richard Hinton and a couple of other people. But I had never met him before, and so we had chapel twice a week, and for some reason he came to chapel. I remember Oral was there that day, and he was the guest speaker. And so when he got up, all 15 Black students had a conniption because he was Carlton Pearson, and he was as charming and as anointed. He sang. I mean, he just did that. And after it was over, I ran to the stage because I have to meet Carlton Pearson. And to my shock, he wasn't as tall as I thought he was. I don't know what I was thinking. And I walked up to him and I couldn't speak. I didn't know what to say. But I just stuck out my hand and I'm shaking him, not saying anything. And he looked at me and he put his hand on my chest and said, "Give me some of them inches, boy." And we talked briefly. And that was my first time meeting Bishop.
Thank you, Brother Patrick.
Yeah.
I have to say my initial encounter with Carlton Pearson, I was about 14, somewhere between 14 and 16 years old. I was singing in Washington State Mass Choir at the time. He would come to Seattle for Tony Morris, a pastor named Tony Morris, New Covenant Christian Center. They had just moved into the old Rainier Temple building, and we would sing before he preached. And from that time forward, whenever he would come to Seattle, he would request Washington State Mass to sing. And so his habit was to come to the green room downstairs in the church and lay hands on every choir member before we would go out to minister. And I can just remember being in awe of his presence and the way he would be gentle with people, which I later found out after meeting him as a pastor. His pastoral sensibility never turned off.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it was at the restaurant or a hotel lobby or behind the scenes or in the pulpit, that pastoral presence and sensibility was always a marker of his personhood. Yeah.
I met Bishop Pearson in New York City as a part of the book tour for the first book. We were at Riverside Church, and I think you introduced me to him, Bishop Selders. And I knew him, like, of course, the image and Azusa Street and how he had launched all of the careers of every prominent Black and otherwise mega church pastor today. So I knew him in that way, but I also knew him. I was like, oh, that's a Kojic boy. Like he says, I grew up with him. And so my first instance, Bishop Selders and Bishop Donaldson can attest to this. I am a bit impish. So I kept teasing him about how I was going to take him to the club. And he just laughed, and he immediately took a kindness to me and asked me what I wanted to do, and just immediately began to pour into me. We were all gathered at Chad Franklin's house. Do you remember Chad? We all gathered at his house afterwards, and I'm still trying to get Bishop in some trouble to see how saved he is. And he is laughing and he is shaking his head at me. And each subsequent encounter, he remembered that. And I would also each subsequent tease him about that. But what's most pressing on my heart now is a sadness, of course, that he's a transition. But over the last, I guess, 24 hours, I have been overcome by a tremendous sense of rage at his detractors. To lose, quote unquote, everything, not for sleeping with your members, not for sleeping with little boys, but because you simply said there was no hell, and to be chastised, and then to see many of those detractors offer celebratory words. And so I'm reminded again of those that first encounter of what he would say to me, which is, let God handle that. Don't hold no art in your heart, and that kind of thing. And so from that moment till I met him, and even now, as Bishop Donaldson has pointed out, that he is still pastoring.
Thank you, brother. Thank you.
I think the first time that I saw him in person would have had to been I think it was Dominion Camp Meeting 97, maybe 96. I was in Indianapolis at the time. No, that's a lie. I was in Ohio. And Rob Parsley was running his Dominion Camp meetings in the summer. And I think Jakes was there that week, Clarence McClendon, some others. This would have been at that time. And I think he preached that service. I think that's the first time I seen him in person. So that's the peak of, you get holding on to all that whole little pocket. I met him after I had actually got a hold of my best friend, and I went to New York City on a spring break trip. We used our refund checks to take us to spring break. And so we said we was gonna go to New York. So we went to New York and kicked it, had a blast. And he was going to Payne Seminary at the time. I was still at Central State. And I was sitting in on his seminary professors' intensives. And so we would get in a lot of theological discourse. Ultimately, we started talking about Pearson. He's PAW. I'm, Baptist, but connected to the Church of God in Christ. And so, because of my family. And so, this is an interesting topic for us. And whatever happened to Carlton Pearson? So we we said we would read the book and kind of figure it out. And the borders that used to be right there at Madison Square Garden, there used to be borders right there. It's shut down now, but that's where I bought that first copy of his book. And I remember on the flight back between my best friend and I, we would hand the book back and forth. And so I was like, he would read the preface, I'd read the preface. He'd read the first chapter, I'd read the first chapter. I don't think we got past chapter 2 before we both looked at each other and said, that man ain't crazy. And I think it would have been 2010. I happened to another friend of mine who became interested in what he was teaching, had heard about this inclusion. No, it wasn't even an inclusion conference. It was just like a meeting in Chicago. There were a number of folks there at a hotel, maybe at the Hilton upstairs, and it was like a precursor, like a offshoot of like the inclusion conference that he was trying to get started up. And that's where I had a chance to meet him. And at that point, I brought this with me. I wanted this copy, and that's where I first heard the story about him hating this copy because he wanted the one of his face on the front. But he said, I said I wanted him to sign this one because this was the one that changed my life. So yeah, it would have been in a teaching moment, and you know how Bishop is; he make fast friends. So he was cool, quick, and yeah, he stuck with me since.
Thank you, brothers. I'll tell the short version of my story. As several of you have already mentioned, who didn't know Carlton Pearson of a certain time, certain era on television. There wasn't but 2 Black people that was on TV, on Christian television. That was Carlton Pearson and Fred Price. And so in the early 1970s, I used to tease him about this. He'd have nice shaped up fro, and he'd be there singing with the World Action Singers or Roberts University. They have them flipping over banisters, and they would do all kind of stuff. And I would tease him about it. And every now and then I'd find a clip or something and send it to him. He said, "Lord," and so I remember him from those days, obviously. And I had a personal connection because there was a pipeline from St. Louis to Oral Roberts University. He had founded and was one of the founders of the university's gospel choir, which is called Souls of Fire. And not long after founding the choir, the Greens, Bishop Raphael Green, Mark, and Chris, all went down to ORU, and so there was a bit of a connection. And then in the mid 1970s, the people I'm related to, my dad and other folk brought Bishop Greenlee was a part of that group. We brought the Souls of Fire to St. Louis to do a concert. And in fact, I remember I reminded him of it. I was in the car. I couldn't drive at the time. This was pre-driving age in the 1970s for me, mid 1970s. Hearing him and Miles Monroe and Ray Green and my dad Joe Ford and others in conversation after the concert. That was my first meeting of him and memory of him. Of course, I can say too, Patrick, he was a rock star as far as I was concerned, because he literally the only Black person you saw on TV. I remember him doing a guest spot with Catherine Kuhlman. And an interesting aside, he could talk like her and mimic her like nobody's business. It used to tickle me for him to turn into Catherine Kuhlman and talk, the way he would talk in reverence of her. And then there were through some other folk, Abdul Hamid, Royal Robinson, went to RU. He was there this is before you, Patrick. And so I made another connection. And then we became good friends with Myron James Bennett and her family. And so we had a St. Louis Tulsa connection, and Carlton was a part of that. I was there at the Mabee Center, the first Azusa meeting.
Wow.
And I was there.
Wow.
Laverna Tompkins was one of the speakers. Joyce Myers, who was one of my Bible college teachers and somebody who I've known for many, many years, was that first week, along with greens, beans, something, Shirley Caesar, who was one of the psalmists that year, and got to spend that entire week in the Mabee Center, that first Azusa, as he began to build that vision out. So that's my earliest, it's kind of a couple of different spaces where we connected, but didn't get to really be very close with him until about a little over 20 years ago, right as all the controversy hit. And so I was there at the first Azusa, and I attended the very last Azusa, as we had come to know it, at the church in there in Tulsa. So it's been an interesting, and as I've been reflecting over the last few hours all day today, I've been thinking of him in all of the different spaces. We've traveled all around this country together, and in spaces and spaces and places. So can any of you just jump in? And I want this to be kind of free form. There's no agenda here other than just to lift him up and lift up the legacy. Reverend Sekou, I ain't gonna let go of what you mentioned there on that B part of what you said. We can spend some time there. I want to spend a little time there. Brother Nicholas.
Was that last one the one Marionette Bronash was that?
No, he was not there. Varan was not there. This last one, the only celebrity that was there was John P. Key. Let me say it again, and I'm gonna say it with my chest. The only celebrity in the gospel world and in the Black church world that came, he brought his choir, brought all the musicians. It was a packed house, and did a concert with John P. Key at that last Azusa at the church. And then the meeting was about 3 days. It wasn't a week long. It was about a 3-4 day meeting. Bernard Jordan was there. Bishop Sweeley was there. There was some other folk who we would, if I called the roll, you would know. But those major folk were not in attendance. By this point, there was a great falling away, I'll call it, and lots of folk who didn't know what he said, Reverend Sekou. They didn't know what he was talking about, but they were talking. And so, coming full circle and remembering some of those moments, the highs and the lows. But Nicholas, you wanted to say more?
I just recall it was one of the last ones. Maybe it was a Sunday service where he prophesied it all, and it was so accurate. I enjoyed watching it back, and I appreciated his words. I just was curious if you were in there in that moment.
When Varan, you're talking about when
he talked, when he spoke to you.
No, that was a meeting. That was a meeting. Bishop Ash spoke. I think it was a 2 or 3 day meeting when he delivered that. And some of that's on YouTube and it's out there to watch. So let's talk a little bit about this legacy. For me, beginning with watching him on Sunday mornings on the Oral Roberts half hour, and then the follow-up, they were at CBS. It was a network televised broadcast of something good is going to happen to you this very hour. and them singing, and the World Action Singers singing, and him with his hands, you know. And again, Bishop Pearson could mimic Oral Roberts as well. He could talk like him, and his antics and his behaviors, you know, were interesting. And then Catherine Kuhlman did the second half hour. So these were 2 half-hour shows. Can y'all get this, folks? He was on network. They were on network TV, CBS, on Sunday mornings. Sunday mornings, the network provided an hour of programming. Well, okay, 42 minutes, but an hour of programming, you know, on network TV every Sunday morning. Amazing. And the black person you saw was this dude, Carlton Pearson. So let's talk about this legacy a bit, as you understand it and as you experienced it coming along.
I think to talk about Bishop Pearson's legacy is to truncate the multiple legacies of Carlton Pearson. There's about 4 waves of legacy that come out of Bishop Pearson, from the ORU days to Higher D, and doing church the way Higher Dimension did church. Then you go into the Azusa movement, and then you go into the doctrine of inclusion, which is not radically new, but it's radically ancient. So it was radically new in our Black church context. I think there are multiple legacies. Well, maybe I skipped one. Maybe there's 5, because you also have to think about the ways in which he impacted and imprinted the Church of God in Christ. So maybe there's 5 separate movements that you would have to talk about his legacy, and talk about what it meant to be Carlton Pearson. You can't truncate it to any one segment. The Azusa moment, you know, to listen to him talk about that moment was to hear him talk about making Pentecost pretty. Mm-hmm. He would always talk about, I wanted to make Pentecost beautiful. And I think for most Black Pentecostal folks, that is the most lasting of the legacies, because it has completely changed and transformed the way Pentecostal people do church, and the way Pentecostal church is viewed globally, right? I mean, it's still difficult to say you're Pentecostal in the academy and be taken seriously as an academician, but partially because Carlton Pearson popularized a beautiful, pretty version of Pentecost. He sanitized it such that it made entrance into places and spaces that it couldn't be before that. I struggle to encapsulate what will be the legacy of Carlton Pearson. I think we have to talk legacies.
Can I add something to that? I think there's about maybe 2 or 3 more legacies, right? He is the progenitor prototype. He single-handedly created an economy for Black charismatic Pentecostals in the 21st century. Literally, like, he was able to take all the training, everything he saw, the technical, the television stuff from Oral Roberts, bring it into his space. And he was one of the first Black preachers who understood the sanctuary as a TV studio. And he purchased cameras and had editing suites, and he understood media and how to position himself. Another legacy is he straddled between cultures, and everybody thought it was fine. He was the first to do that. When we talk about Azusa, again, it's always, to me, one of the things is the economy. There was no mass gatherings of Black Pentecostals outside of convocation. They had no other space to gather. He was able to bring Pentecostals, and some of us who grew up Pentecostal in the Church of God in Christ, but we couldn't find a space. Like, there was no room for us. And he literally created a space for us, everybody, to come together And from that, I remember, and it's on tape, a young, Bishop Paul Morton, who was thinking about Full Gospel Baptist Church, coming there. And he had plenary sessions to teach about organizing and administration and conference attendance and travel and how do you host. And from that moment on, because originally Azusa was called consecration camps. That's what it was at the church, how it started, and then it kind of evolved into Azusa. And every major conference, you mentioned Dominion, Fire in the Rockies, Harvest Fire, Back to the Bible, Woman Are Loose, all have their origins in Carlton Pearson teaching them how to do this and go back to where they were and the host conferences. He created an economy that they are still living in today while they, So.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I think the other did I interrupt you, Brother Nicholas?
No,
I just was resonating with what Patrick said on the back end. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
I tried not to say it. I'm trying to...
Let me just say, I'm the least saved on this conversation, so I've been holding my MFs and SOBs. So you pray for me. But I think that it's interesting, Bishop Donaldson, as you raise the account. Jonathan Walton acquired Bishop Pearson's papers, and they're at Harvard. And there's something to be said about that. There's something to be said about his papers being at Harvard. And I think also another legacy, if there is negative, may not be the word. I'm trying to find a better word for it. But I think the fallout post Azusa and post then Dr. Well, let me just say this, and I said this to him. One of the challenges that Bishop Pearson encountered is when he ran for mayor, and there was a possibility that he would have become mayor, and in the town that still drips the smoldering embers of the Tulsa massacre yet burn. And that how dare he think that he could control that economy. So it's one thing to control Black Pentecostal economy, Black church economy. It's another when you think you can control the economy of a city. And so I think one of the things that there's a cautionary tale to us about the danger of place and being the Black son of the white master. I think there's a cautionary tale to us there about when you get out of place, because the way they situated it, Patrick, is that he had a place. And I think the other cautionary tale in that legacy for us, and negative is not the word that I don't have another word for it, is the danger of scale. That when you grow so fast and you got these buildings and these capital campaigns, and you got to maintain a large staff, that a minor inconvenience in that structure can be devastating, let alone a full-on attack on the probability of the institution that you've built. And so I think part of that legacy is those cautionary tales, both around scale and around place. I think it's something for all us to consider, because when I talked to him about it, he was like, the buildings were a lot. The maintenance of that institution was a lot. And that I hinted in his voice that if there was another way to have done it, where you could have had that kind of impact, but without that kind of superstructure to care for, I suspect that he may have considered a different way of going about
it. I think to Patrick's point about economy and the vultures living off of the economy he taught them to build, the problem with capitalism is that it demands unemployment. And when Carlton gifted us doctrine of inclusion and went a different way, he became the unemployed victim of the economy that he created.
Mm.
Too many folks were
Mm.
looking for his piece of the pie, and the pie is limited. So rather than support the one that had been feeding them, they began to feed off of the one that had taught them how to feed. You understand what I'm saying? It's the danger of a capitalist system in the church that should have a capitalist critique.
Ooh,
I just wanted.
Y'all so deep. Oh my God.
I just want to just add, when you bring up the idea of politics, right? I literally have a cassette tape from Higher Dimensions from 1992, where he's teaching the gospel of inclusion. Don't tell everybody they can't be saved. Tell them that they already saved. And when you listen to it, you hear that everybody's like, "Oh, this is so profound. Oh, this is great." What happened between 1992 and the end game of Azusa? It was the politics. He got out of place, and there's plenty of a white power structure who co-owned Charisma, who hammered him and paid other black preachers. Here's where it becomes carnivorous. We start eating each other, and they pounded him. So I was always like, well, he was preaching this 6 years before 1998. Oh, yeah, you ran for mayor. That's what that's what they would not have in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Miles Monroe did Azusa in 91, right? Wasn't that the big one that he did in 90? Was it 91? You said he was preaching inclusion in about 92. His tracks. I remember him saying that was kind of where it began to crack for him. Was actually Miles's the first time he came, and so I would be very interested to hear that tape from 92. I wish you could digitize it some way or another. That would be awesome.
Let me work on it.
Yeah. The thoughts he began to speak out loud were thoughts he had been ruminating with since his freshman year at ORU. He had a Bible, first year Bible teacher who helped him begin to think some of these thoughts and ask some of these questions. And one of the conversations we had early on, as we were talking about what he began to name, and let's be clear, I need to name some folk, the staff of the church at the end, Tennille and Nikki, and of course, there's so many. I'm gonna mess up because I ain't gonna name all the people, right? Helped to craft what we call the gospel of inclusion, right? So that was a project, as I experienced it as it was in unfolding before my very eyes. There was lots of strangeness that was going on. There was lots of strangeness, and yet I said to him, "Man, these are not new thoughts. You know that, right? This is what what Christianity was its first 500 years. It was a kind of Christian universalism. That there wasn't a straight path." Maybe Tertullian, as one of the early church fathers in 1st century, 2nd century, may have been a tongue talker, but there were others that weren't tongue talkers, right? Y'all get me if I'm off base. Y'all call me on it. There were others who were a part of this conversation, and this has been since the beginning of what we call now the church, which didn't really start to be what it is that we call the church until about the 3rd to the 4th century. All right, so historically, the trajectory of the church, and we can talk long and wax eloquently about that. These are not new thoughts. They weren't new thoughts. They were just new to the folk he was expressing them to, and bringing a kind of thinking and a kind of scholarship, but posed always almost in question form. It was T.L. Osborne who suggested that Jesus was the savior of the whole world. And you can't get no more evangelical than T.L. Osborne, right? And even T.L. started stepping back. Well, that's not what I thought. Once the gospel of inclusion kind of got named, it started to get some traction in a negative context. And I will say negative, Brother Sekou, that you know, some of what his thinking was, and in having conversation with dear Bishop, he said to me, I didn't think I was that radical. I certainly thought I had gotten a new revelation, but you know, wasn't that the thing in the 90s? Catching hold to some kind of new, you know, getting
A
something
rhema word. A rhema word.
you know, and got a rhema word. Come on here. And so he didn't think that this was such a radical thing, that maybe this would help us even be broader and expand it even more. And the platforms that he shared. I mean, he was early on TBN. He was early on PTL. Right. And of course, you know, he was around with all those other things. He was the beginning of that. So, and at the beginning and at the center of it. And I think you're absolutely right. There's something to be said about the economy and the traversing of lines. Dr. King, if he were here, he'd have something to say about staying in your lane. And when you get out your lane, what happens to one, you know, whatever that prescribed lane is. And we needed those that were breaking through some of that, that kind of way. Brother Patrick, you wanted to jump in and say something else? I thought I saw you lean in a bit.
No, go right ahead. I'm good.
I have a question around the newness of the revelation, in the sense of this, is that while the teaching is ancient and old, there's a way in which he never let Pentecostalism go. And I think that was unique. You get a little of it like with our dear sister who runs the East Bay Church of Religious Science in Oakland, the Eloise, Reverend Eloise, right? You get some Black Southern religious performativity taking place in their kind of their new thought. But there's a way in which he never surrendered Black Pentecostalism. He may have shaved off some of the jagged edges, so to speak. But through what he did in Azusa, there's a consistency also what he did in New Thought, because while he talked about Christ consciousness, he still was holiness and his grandmama and mama's and family's child through and through. And I think that is the it's like when Cornel West describes jazz music as when African souls play European instruments. There's a way in which this Pentecostal soul, and when African souls play European instruments, you get jazz. There's something about the way in which he breathed into these instrumentalities and produced a new kind of art form.
Well, that's interesting. One of our brothers that's in the chat reminded me this part. Thank you, Abdul Hamid. That largely he was thinking out loud. He was articulating what was flowing out of him, kind of as he questioned. And can I be honest? How many of us are in questioning modes and modalities that didn't have the center of attention in one way? And I think, you know, I say in a teasing way, the world is full of hatred and jealousy. That's kind of the way some of our people would say it, Reverend say from down south. I think there were lots of people that wanted his space.
Talk, sir.
There were lots of folk who were envious, and any slip, they would have jumped right in and wanted to. And I think that created its own kind of space in this field. But y'all tell me, am I off base?
And I have to say, there's more. It's more than just his space that they wanted. There was something about Carlton Pearson that he kept himself, as the old saints say, and the text says, unspotted from the world. There was something about the purity of his personhood that he could maintain that level of success and still walk with an even higher level of integrity. And most of them were dirty. And and dirty people can't stand clean hands. And some of it was they wanted his power, but some of it was they just were jealous that he was able to maintain the integrity of his personhood and his soul and the freedom and the liberty. He was a God-fearing free Black man. He spoke his truth and nobody owned him. And when it cost him, he was willing to pay the cost, and it did not kill him. And that's what, to this day, they cannot stand.
There were a lot of, the church is a human environment. And I think sometimes we forget that, or it's off the table. And they looked at him and said that, oh, I have a better education, I could sing better, I could do all these things better. And the only difference between me and you is Oral Roberts. Like, you had an opportunity that a lot of us didn't have. And so if you get him off the table, they blindly thought that they could be him, right? And recreate what he did. But I think we have to appreciate that he was one of one.
Yes.
And when that was over, and when they esteemed or thought that he had no value, we just didn't have that anymore. And we will never see his likes or have that moment of what Azusa was and what that movie. We'll never do that. We'll never have it again. And so I'm not sure. I am sure that the church didn't forward itself by deeming him the Antichrist or heretic, right? Because like you said, his personal life and his personal integrity was as of such that the only way they can bring him down and tear him apart is to pick at his theology. And since they picked away his theology, we've got all kind of crazy stuff now. Allegations and court documents and all of that ain't gonna lead people to hell. But he's gone. Oh, okay. All right.
Nonsense.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm on the radio. I'm sorry.
But I said for you, fuck them niggas.
Yeah, that. Can we talk real for a minute?
Like,
Lord
the
help us.
reality is that
Lord help us.
you niggas danced on his fucking grave before he was in it. You and again, I'm not claiming that I ain't nowhere near as holy as he was. And so I'm not making a moralistic position about my own sense of holiness, but I'm just saying it's like, come on, dude, you get people pregnant in your church. Your son get caught sleeping with boys, and you pay people to write to hide it, and then some of you, rest your souls, ran whole sex rings with men you groomed in your churches, but and built mega churches while doing it. And I think it's something you said to Bishop Selders is I've maybe been the conversation between Jeremiah Wright and Bishop Blake about the necessity of spookiness for a lot of these pastors to maintain their hold over their congregations and to be able to continue to fleece them.
There's something here that certainly is worth continuing to have a conversation, and I'm one that will stand in the midst of this conversation and hold on to all of us as we talk about it. That I too was very angered by what many of the church folks did. But let's be clear, it just wasn't black folk. The white folk went to running too. And the white folks schemed, and they had facility like a Charisma magazine. For one whole year, Carlton Pearson and an article was published once a month in the gossip rag of the evangelical charismatic world. It didn't make sense at a point how much his name and what he was thinking out loud actually, said. And the fact of business is, most, if you would push them today and ask them, what was that? They couldn't tell you. They could not tell you what that was that he actually taught, other than, and then he would go on y'all remember these days, he would be on a tour, Brother Nicholas. He would be out there and he would say, listen, I still believe in Jesus. I still, hey, glory to God, speak in tongues and shout. I still do all of the stuff that I used to do. And yet, what I'm also doing is thinking about faith beyond a very limited viewpoint, right? And who amongst us, if we would really be honest, that hasn't thought some of these thoughts? I struggle with heaven, and I certainly struggled with hell, because you can't hardly find it in the Old Testament. And I now have read a little bit, so I also know that the whole idea of the devil and hell and lots of stuff we now have doctrines about. Well, I know now because I do reads every now and then. This stuff, these were inventions of the church later, not early but late, and that there were no centralized themes other than, even the fact that Jesus was a real person has been fought and fought over in the very church he is alleged to have founded. So, can we just be real clear that this, the fear that drove folk to put him week after week after week, month after month, front page, huge headlines. And who does that and comes out of that with the kind of grace that he lived up under, with the pressure of it all? I can't name but one person. And I'll say one more word. My beloved Pamela, you all know, she said to me one day, she said that your friend Carlton Pearson is the real deal. He is authentic. There was something about him that even at his lowest, the kind of grace, and I would agree, Patrick, that he was the model, and he's not been replicated at all, none. And I think part of what my part of what's emotional for me is that he didn't experience the love and the respect and regard that he is certainly due.
Yeah.
Right. And still at this end, as he was making transition, it was folk flapping their mouth, didn't know, and they don't know whereof they speak.
Yeah.
And so that, my anger is centered in that space, and y'all help me, because I'm, that's where my hurt is. And that the family got to deal with some of that garbage.
And he didn't like that shit neither. The way that people treated him, he also did not like. He felt that, but he was more graceful than he wasn't, as we know, and allowed other folks later, more recently, to kind of banter back and forth with him. But it's amazing to me that the amount of hate and ignorance and all of that was spewed at him, that he remained like a gift. The question that he asked was, what do you believe? Most of these fools don't know the answer to that question. They do not know, and just still was open and willing to, to engage with folk, and was constantly offering almost keys to liberation. Had they answered those questions, even wrestled with them long enough. What do you believe? Why do you believe it? How does any of this add to, subtract from the quality of your living? Had they done that, they would have been freed up, right? One of the things I appreciate about Bishop was, he said it in his book, and I felt that, it didn't matter whether he was right. He was being real. Most folks were so baked, focused on being spooky, trying to, play the game, all that kind of stuff like that. And he was authentic through and through, thoroughbred, as they say, right? And was just existed as a pathway to liberation. That's what he was for me. And for others that were willing to engage with him. I think I stopped debating with folks on the internet, once I realized, mostly to your point, they ain't read the book. After a while, I just said, have you read his book? Did you read it? No. Okay, then there's not a discussion to have. But if you actually took the time out to listen to it, the liberation was there. He was asking the questions that would have freed a whole lot of folk, and still do to this day. And for him to give that gift in the face of so much hate and dismissal, knowing that he built the platform, knowing that he made the way. I love the fact that you said that. Yeah, he was a partaker of an economy that he built and then was pushed out of it. But because he was so thorough, there were other lakes from which he could draw. There were other fields that he could be in, because he created such community beyond this particular space. And so I think this is an enduring testament to who he was as a human. I remember it was Thanksgiving week. This is crazy. It was Thanksgiving week when I went to his apartment, and he was staying in Trump at this point, in Trump Tower in Chicago. And we sat there and talked. He sat in his chair. I sat there and talked to that man for about 4 hours. Madge and Julian were there. Gina was kind of in and out, and he was cooking. And we sat down and talked. I remember him saying, he said, on my tombstone, on my epitaph, I want it to be said that I love too much. That I love too much. And yeah, I think he did it. I think he pulled that off.
Okay, Nicholas, you done started something here now, because I love this man, this mammoth, this huge light. And what is very precious to me is that, you all know me pretty well. He allowed me to get to know him pretty well. And the level, and of course he made fast friends. So everybody he got about 5,000 folk that would say they were close.
Yeah.
And they were, because he was right there with you.
Yep. He was with all of them. Yep.
Yeah, he was that spirited of a person. But there are very few people who, in his presence, I felt like I was with, I knew that I was with somebody that's special, that will take this mantle. I was remembering Patrick, we were talking, I was remembering Jesse. Jesse Williams served as his right hand at the end of the big times, right? As folk were falling away, Jesse was there. And Jesse had a background in marketing. And so lots of some of the stuff that got developed, Jesse was behind the scenes helping to work that out and talk that out with them. And I certainly was one of a number of folk who were engaged in discourse and dialogue about what he was thinking out loud. And he you knew when he hit the room. Some people that come in the room and they just come in the room. Other folk come in the room and you're somehow something special. The atmosphere changes for real, not the fake one, because you got an entourage. And I happen to have been with Bishop Pearson with the entourage, And I was with him a whole lot of times when it wasn't nobody but him. And he and I, you know, carrying on and going forth. And then he stopped to talk to every single person. I don't care if he was in the airport or we was on the street. He was kind and dear and never mean spirited. Never mean spirited. I ain't saying he wasn't human. He was a human being.
Yes, he
So
was.
sometimes he was just got tired of folk. You know, and he went on home. He went on, you know, where he had to go. Lastly, can I go? I want to go around and say, if you could say one thing, one lasting thing tonight, you know, and this is all fresh and new for us. You know, we'll have more of these kinds of conversations where certainly I'll be more articulate about what I think in his regard. But if there was one thing you could say that you take away from being in relationship with Bishop Pearson, what would that one thing be? What would that one thing be?
To be. Yeah. Carlton Pearson helped me get real comfortable being and valuing being. You know, after you've done all you can, just stand, you know, in that sense, right? Being very kind of, as the kids say, I'm standing on it. You know, once you got clear about where you are, stand there and be comfortable with that. He also encouraged me to live on the edge. He would entertain some ideas. And I hear him like pushing me to no, go out there, you know. So be and lean forward. Probably, I think that's. I'm sure there will be more things that I'll unpack over the course of the next however long. But when you ask that question, it's the first thing that comes to mind. I got a little self-confidence once I watched that man walk through that and still remain sweet.
Mm.
Through and through. Yeah.
For me, it's to know your assignment. I'll never forget Bishop Yvette Flunder had summons me to Las Vegas. She said, I need you to talk to Carl. And she set up a meeting. It was our real grown man meeting, first time. We sat there and talked for hours. And he said to me, my assignment to you is to equip you and make sure you have everything you need to succeed. And I won't do it publicly because I don't want the stain of my name on you now. And I was like, Bishop, your name is not a stain. It's an honor. He said, not for where you are and not for where you're going. And so he spent years in the background calling me, texting me. Don't do that. I put out a video. He said, take that tie off. I mean, just the little things for years. And it wasn't until he knew my church had gone through a transition. John, you know, Bishop Selders, you know. And then he said, all right, now it's time for me to walk with you publicly because you're ready. And you can hold the weight of walking with me. And he kept his word. He walked with me privately and he walked with me publicly. And he was the same, whether private or public. And I think knowing your assignment and being comfortable in it is probably one of the greatest lessons that I've learned.
I'm thinking about when the book God is not a Jew, God is not a Christian. You remember that? And I remember he was telling me about that. I don't know where we were, and he told me the new title of it, and I was like, "You don't want no friends, do you?" No friends. And he laughed real hard at me, and he said, "You just not gonna act right, are you?" I said, and there was something about his innocence. And you remember that scene in Come Sunday where he's under the cover and he's praying and fasting about hell. And I think one of the things, and Bishop Donaldson and Bishop Selders have heard me talk about this a lot. One of the things that I've learned and come to appreciate, and I think the thing that sticks with me the most about him, is the depth of the tradition of our people. Like his grandmama and grandfather and aunts and uncles. I feel like part of that innocence is that he was so prayed over and so prayed up that when his enemies came upon him to eat of his flesh, they stumbled and they fell.
Be careful now. Be careful.
You know, that's something that like with that movie and all of the success that he would enjoy from the film and his resurgence in these last 5 years. That I watch God prepare a table in the presence of his enemies. And I think that comes from when you've been dipped in that tradition and that you know the moan of slaves. And that I in that way, Nicholas, that being is ancient. And so that thing of how he was prayed up. And then the last piece for me is that how he has so much tolerance for my foolishness. Like I don't think I can't remember other than a few times where I actually had a serious conversation with him because I was poking at him all the time. And that I pray to God that there's some young person trying to find their way who think they know everything and think how they have all the answers, that I have the grace and patience to deal with their foolishness as well.
I remember back when all of this kind of first things kind of started to unravel, and he had a preaching engagement in Baltimore. For some reason, I was there. No, it was the joint college, that whole thing, because I was in the room when that happened. Afterwards, Jesse Williams was like, he has to preach. Why don't you come? Why don't you come with us? And of course, sure. And I remember I was riding in the van, and he was very meditative. And to speak to what you said, he started praying in the Holy Ghost. Like he got himself and his mechanics. Like, I'm getting ready to preach. And I asked him after it was over, after he preached that night, and he was wonderful. I asked him about, well, what is that like for you now? He was like, I am so dependent on the Holy Ghost. Like, I can't get up and I don't have I don't have my partner with me. So wherever I'm going, he was rooted, and like, this is just this is just what it is. I sat with him. I went to Tulsa a couple of months ago and sat next to his bed. And that same Holy Ghost that he had 20 something years ago, he still had it. He wasn't bitter. He was reflective. He talked a lot about us and his legacy, and he was very, clear about, I just planted some seeds. You all, take it. But if there's anything that I discern from that space that he was in, he is the most courageous man that I think I have ever met. I asked myself, would I have the courage of my convictions if I was Carlton Pearson in 1996, 97, and knowing what was on the line, stick to what I believe God gave me, and whatever I lose or whatever I gain, I'll just do it because this is my calling, this is my assignment. I would like to think that I would, but I saw him do it. I saw him still saved and still wishing the best for everybody. And he wasn't bitter. He never got vindictive, which there was a lot of times I was like, you way more saved than I am. Because I promise you,
You're better than me. You're way
You're
better
better than me.
yeah, because
Yes.
he didn't punch back, and he had every impulse he could have, and had ammunition, and he didn't. And I am so amazed. I'm still so in awe of that, and so yeah.
Yeah. You know, for me, you would want to have the opportunity in one's vocational life, professional life, and personal life to walk with a giant, somebody that you know. You all know, you know, I spent many years as a musician that preached. And then somewhere made the transition into a preacher that played the piano a little bit and sang. And so I've had, you know, in my life and career moments that I knew I was walking with somebody really, really important, somebody really, really, you know, somebody really, really great, and somebody greater than yourself. All right. Um, and for me, a takeaway is that, you know, spending the last 20 years or so walking very close with somebody that was greater than, somebody that was both a big brother, a senior, and a giant, and to have also have the blessedness of having a reciprocal relationship with somebody that huge and that big. And I remember there are many things that are, you know, that race through my mind as I remember. But Patrick, I too remember the times when it was just, you know, after the crowd, after the big event. We were in Seattle and we had a precious dear moment. Um, had a moment where you can't hear me. We had a moment where the I heard a knock at the door, and then we had a kiki giggly, way past silly moment because he couldn't find his room at the hotel. Now I say that to say, how many of us have gotten lost? You ain't gonna tell it. You ain't gonna tell it. But you have gotten twisted up and turned around and didn't know. And what he was able to say is, one, ain't no shame in my game. I need some help, first off. And I don't remember. I can't find where I'm going. And it humanized him for me in the midst of the giant of a person he was. I'm gonna say one more word. He was very hurt by what had happened to him and the quote fall, and by the folk who did betray him in some ways, and the folk. What he did not do is publicly lash out to them as they publicly dismissed him. And he taught us how to do it in a way that we'll need some time to really muster up the grace. And I don't know if I will have it, quite frankly. But we will hear tribute after tribute now. We will see and experience things. And my prayer is that God help me and others, help you be as magnanimous in the tributaries as he was. And that's my prayer. God help me, because I want to say a couple of things, use some of Sekou's words. And then I got some words I know how to say my own self. I'm from the loop. So I got some things I could say. But I pray that God give us all the grace.
Holy Ghost.
Yes. But you got something to say, brother? Brother Donaldson? Bishop.
Brother Donaldson? No, I'm praying your strength in the Lord. Praying your strength in the Lord.
I'm fine with being the designated cursor outer on the behalf of the ministry. So you just tell me who I need to go see, and I'll do it for you. And y'all can blame it all on me because, you know, I pastor a Methodist church.
Listen, last words to say in this moment. Our prayer with Majesty and Julian and Gina and his family, his sisters, and all of the nieces and the nephews, and his dear mom who's still with us, and all of the higher D, the many different versions of higher D. I'm particularly fond of the late crew that stayed. Particularly fond of them, and then those who transitioned into a loving place. And I'm remembering, way past so many that journeyed with us and with him during that time. Keep them in your thoughts and prayers. There will be arrangements announced, and do your very best to as the saints would say, govern yourselves accordingly. Amen. Any other words any of you want to share? I appreciate you all coming on with me tonight, and in this just part one. This is just a down payment on the tribute. We'll be talking about our brother and friend for the coming days and weeks. Thank you all who were listening live. The chat is lit, so you all go and check it out later on. Thank you for linking to us, and I promise on these Monday nights we will continue to have relevant conversations and host times to talk about Bishop Pearson and the likes of him in the months and days to come. Thank you all, and peace and God bless.